Hello again, everybody. Welcome back. If it's your first time seeing me on your computer screen or whichever device you are using, I'm Valentina, MC today, part of the CMX team here at CMX, of course, and we are ready to bring on our next speaker. So he is the co-founder of Standing on Giants. He built Sony PlayStation's first community in 2006 before joining the startup team at UK telco disruptor gifgaf. He co-founded Standing on Giants in 2012 to help other businesses around the world build thriving communities, including Airbnb, O2, Tesco Bank, and Lenovo. Please welcome Vincent Boon.
Hello. So shall I just jump right into my presentation?
Go for it.
All right, I will. So hi, everyone. Very glad to be here. And I'm going to share a little bit of experience that I've got around community ownership. Kind of, through my career, stumbled upon this, as I'm just executing my role as community manager for various different companies. I've really, done online communities for about 20 years, or a bit more maybe. Late 90s, I kind of started with IRC communities and message boards, just for games that I liked. And as I was doing this, and I also, by the way, did a community for meetup.com. It was like a poker community, and it was basically teaching people how to play poker in London. I eventually grew to like 200,000 people playing poker all over London in various different pubs. Got nice and messy, got kicked out a few times because pub landlords were getting all scared. But as I was doing this, I was actually working for a computer games company, Eidos. And I was there doing quality assurance, so really testing games. Although fun, I'm not a massive fan of football, I'm afraid to say, sorry. But Championship Manager is all about statistics and specifically around how teams kind of like progress through the years as well. And we had a really kind of like engaged fan base, so engaged that at times they would stand outside the office berating the QA testers about how, some sort of bug had gotten through and was actually in the released version. And so as I was kind of like, responsible for testing this new kind of like Championship Manager game online, I thought, well, what better way to do this if I'm not particularly good at it than getting the actual fans involved. So I talked to the producer of the game and suggested, that this could be a possibility. And we talked to the marketing department, and yes, we would have some emails potentially of some of the fans who had signed up to a newsletter for Eidos. And so we reached out to a couple of hundred people. And the response was amazing. People definitely wanted to be involved. And we set up a really kind of like low tech kind of like mapping of my bug database versus kind of like a website. And me teaching these people on how to report bugs, how to classify them, how to add in reproduction steps, all of these kind of like good things. That group eventually grew to about 20,000 people testing this game. And as I was managing this kind of like budding community, they were very proactive themselves. So they started creating kind of like leagues and letters, and they wrote newspapers and bulletins, telling other community members about what had happened over the weekend and which games had been going well or not. And that eventually led to us talking to the development team as well, and adding in these kind of like leagues and letter systems, as well as the newsletters and that kind of stuff. So the game became much richer as an experience in the end. And so that kind of gave me that first inkling of like, ooh, what can I do to solve business problems? In this case, it was my own for not actually being very good at, understanding all of the different statistics within Championship Manager, as well as obviously, a massive cost saving for the business itself by having so many people test the game. So what do I mean by kind of like community ownership? Right. Very often I find that communities are kind of like dangling to the side of a business. The community manager is, definitely heavily engaged in managing a community and that community activity, but has little, conversations or influence within the organization. Often, of course, a beautiful report gets created and gets sent around the business, and some kind of conversations can happen from that. But when we really start looking at community ownership, it kind of like changes where the role sits. And so we're really looking now to make sure that the community activity actually overlaps with the business goals. And so we're really looking at working closely with different department heads. Now, I've been super lucky in the companies that I've worked with, especially when it came to starting with gifgaf. There you're really talking about a team of, it started with sort of like 10 people, then grew to about 20, 25, and it stayed that way for a long time. So it was much easier for me, obviously, to really get to talking with the different department heads as the company grew. But really what it helped for me was really helping me understand that the community owner is really helping that organization achieve its goals through the community. And how did I kind of like do that? It was really kind of like mapping out what my colleagues were doing, what was keeping them busy on a day-to-day basis, right? And so how can I kind of like speak their language? How do I understand the different kind of things that are working for them? And so here's a kind of like a little example of something that I did, where I started really mapping out the different activities that the different departments were working on, right? And what did that mean? And how could community be involved in these different activities? Is there any way that they could help decide how these different things work? What do we communicate about each of these different elements that the business does? And at what stage can community members actually help do something? And if you start mapping these different things out and you start learning around what problems different departments have, this can lead to some real massive impacts. And as an example of that, I thought I'd tell you a little story about Vivo, who we work with as well. So Vivo is a big incumbent telco in Brazil. You're talking about 120 million customers. They've got a customer service department of 30,000 people. They literally have a Vivo university, training people up to help join the customer service workforce. And with that many customers, of course, the volume of incoming calls or contact through a variety of different channels is huge. And as we were kind of like speaking to them and finding out how their whole contact structure and sensors worked, I found some really interesting tools as well, by the way. Even back in those days, you're talking about 2012 and maybe even 11, and people were already listening in, like software was already listening in to calls, and then kind of like voices were heightened, and then more experienced customer service level agents would jump in and help out in a call like that. And one of the things that we found out is that the biggest volume of incoming contacts was about one simple word called saldo. And that basically meant figuring out how much money that you still have left on your phone. And by understanding that, we actually started working with our community to talk about, what are the different ways in which you can, figure out what your saldo is. And by doing that, it created a range of different content that Google picked up, and organic traffic started really, just hitting the community like crazy. And within the first, months or so, we already had hundreds and hundreds of thousands of hits on this specific content, which eventually led to, a really huge call deflection, which is like, saved the company a very significant amount of money, all by figuring out, one small kind of like word that had a massive impact on the company. That obviously helped us make the case for community in a variety of different areas as well. And so that's kind of what I'm always looking for, right? When I'm working with companies, is that how do we find very small examples of something that the community can do that has a significant impact on the business. So therefore, we're really looking at sort of like, what are their KPIs, right, for other people, like not ours, right? We know what we need to do. We need to build a great community. We need to get a lot of, people involved in our thinking and helping us out with their ideas, right? But when we look at other people's KPIs, a good example of this is within gifgaf. I was working with a great guy called Kim Fora, and he was responsible for all of our web assets. gifgaf wasn't, at that point, didn't have the budgets to do, television advertising or kind of like big budget commercials. We're talking about banners on on various different websites. And yeah, we were creating a variety of different banners, and I was talking about that with the community. And here's an example of this. And we were, basically trying to explain the proposition of what gifgaf was. And as I was discussing this with the community, I was sharing kind of like the different materials that we were using, all the marketing assets, and kind of had like a good back and forth. And the community kind of like came back, not as one, but a variety of different people, talking to us that maybe we didn't explain our proposition that well. And so, I asked them, well, how should we then explain it better? Please help us out. And so there was a bit of back and forward to that. And then eventually people said, well, maybe you guys haven't really, hit it quite right on the design of the banners as well. So we went back and said, all right, well, how could we change this? And so back and forth we went, and eventually the community created a set of different banners with different explanations of the product. And there were 5 of them that were eventually chosen, and we A/B tested them versus our own. It turns out that 3 of their banners did indeed do much better than ours. So we swapped them out. And again, it's that finding those kind of like small nuggets of gold within your community, which you can bring back to teams and show them that there is real value in working with that community. Another example is within Airbnb. Standing on Giants 6 years ago, we started managing the community for Airbnb. And right at the start of it, Airbnb was struggling in terms of the hosts, in terms of the experience that they were giving guests. So the challenge was really for us to, how do we uplift, the experience within for guests, and how do we, teach hosts on the different ways in which they can help guests and can create that really good experience. That led to eventually, an uplift in 25% in terms of ratings for hosts. Right, they were working with us, and again, this opened kind of like doors for a variety of different programs, and an amazing one, which I'll show you at the end as well. But everything that we're always looking for is, can we find any kind of like statistics that give a bit of cut through to help other departments understand the value of community. And so within Airbnb, we also worked with the hosting team really closely and did a range of kind of like CRM integrations with holdout groups. And we're really, they're obviously looking around what hosts' earnings and retention is. And so with all of the work that we did with them to kind of like really measure the impact of community, this is the kind of like statistic that we came up with, right? And so here we can really see that, it's undeniably that, members of a community are a real asset to the business. And it's using a metric like this that we can present to anyone in the business, and it will be relevant to them. They will understand it. There's no one's going to argue with that kind of like statistic. So that really helps in the conversations and helps get people enthusiasm for looking at different ways in which they can help or get the community to help them. And so my last kind of like tip is around finding value that no one knows is there. Right, as a community manager and your team, you're always, right in the trenches, right? So you see all of the smaller conversations that are happening within your community. And so it's really looking at those and eventually kind of like challenging members or pushing them to, do a little bit more or explain something a bit further, right? But it can also come from really, again, small things or unexpected things. And a little story around that is, again, for gifgaf, which I think you quite like, is around the MicroSims. So this is 2010, and the iPhone had just come out, and Apple, in its infinite wisdom, decided that that big SIM card was actually not a good idea, and we should have MicroSims. gifgaf has a warehouse full of big SIM cards and no money to change the production process. So how the hell are we going to supply, these small kind of like micro SIM cards? Well, that would be a while. What you did have was a very clunky kind of like scissor that you could put a big SIM card in, and you click it, and out comes a micro SIM. I bought a few of these and actually sent them out to a few community members that had said, oh, actually, I would like to cut my SIM down, but I don't dare do it with scissors just in case I break it. So I said, no worries, here's a scissor. And if someone else asks, just send it to the next person. And so we did. Basically, these scissors started doing a round robin on the community. But as the iPhone became more and more popular, more and more people wanted MicroSims. So now community members started buying these SIM card cutters and started sending out SIM cards for us, which started off with a little forum post, basically, automating the process of randomly picking a member that was interested in this, that eventually led to the community members creating a complete end-to-end distribution program, right, that we as a business actually added into our own sales process, right? So when you went through the journey of signing up with gifgaf, it would say, oh, are you looking for a micro SIM card? If so, please go to this website. Eventually, of course, we were able to change our process and supply MicroSims. However, a couple of years later, Apple decided to go to nano SIMs. So again, we used the same process, and the users helped us. Again, it's an amazing way of actually working with your customers. So all in all, for gifgaf, like a small company, or certainly started off small, with really using our community members in all, kind of like aspects of the business, the kind of results that we were able to achieve was that the customers were doing 80% of our customer support, right? So anything that wasn't account related was part of what the customers would be solving. And you're talking, even in the middle of the night, you would get an answer within 90 seconds. 40% of all of our customers came through get member programs, right? The community was the ones that were actually going out there recruiting new members for us. And so overall, as a business, and because it was part of, called Telefonica, it's like a mobile network empire, we knew that we were running this business at 50% of the operating cost versus others. So these are really, really significant impacts for businesses. And lastly, as I mentioned, something really cool as we're working with Airbnb, and there's a real, commitment to the community and an understanding of the value that it represents. Airbnb have actually announced at the end of last year that their community actually has a say in the business decisions at a governance level, right? So there's a $1 billion fund has been created to support the hosts, and it's all been allocated by the members of the community on the board. So yeah, really, really special to be working with such amazing companies that are really willing to work with their community and are looking for very new and innovative ways in doing this. So in summary, try and really understand what your colleagues are working on. Try and by speaking their language, understanding kind of like the business principles that they are trying to work towards. Look at their KPIs, not just yours. So what can the community do to get them their bonus, for example? They will always find that interesting. And try and find the value that no one actually knows is there, and bring that to them. I hope this kind of like helps you in your journey. Always happy to obviously answer any questions that anyone has. So with that in mind, if there are any, I am more than happy to answer any that you have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vincent. A big round of applause via virtual chat for Vincent. Great little tidbits from all your experience. It's incredible what you've done over such a short space of time, or should I say long space of time? I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, how long is a year anymore? I don't even know. All right, let's get to some questions. If you have any questions, pop them in the Q&A tab. That's where I'm going to be going. So we do have a question already in there by Oana. They say sometimes there's a gap between where we, brackets community viewers, think the value lies and where it really is. It takes some time to realize, and some members can feel confused in between. Do you have any tips on how to help members understand that this is a part of the journey and not a lack of professionalism? Thanks.
Yeah, so I think for me, a lot of that lies in explaining things to the community members. So, you know, an example of this is we did a price rise, right? So we had to raise the prices of the actual product. So now we're having to, you know, explain to users why we need to do this, right? So now you need to go to the business reasons and what kind of like impacts that has on the actual company, right? The reasons why we need to do this. That led to eventually, you know, the community, really kind of like understanding that, okay, this does need to happen. And we then asked, all right, well, if we're going to, you know, raise the prices, by how much is that? You know, how much do you want to pay extra, basically? And back and forth discussion, which eventually ended up, and I'll make a very long story short, with the community giving us kind of like one extra penny per text that they were sending, which meant we could do a whole range of, you know, cool community projects as well. So not only did we have a price rise, we were actually getting a little bit more money from the members. As well as that, over that whole discussion, there was more positive sentiment than negative sentiment. And that's on a price rise discussion. So that's, you know, it's really about taking your members on that journey and explaining to them the reasons why you're doing things. And then that kind of like understanding will help them, get more of an understanding of why they should help you, right? And what they can do.
I've noticed this very often in the different communities that I've been in, but people love to be communicated with. They like to be in the loop about what's going on and, as you said, why things are happening. Because then if you then just kind of out of nowhere say, hey, we're doing this, or hey, our prices have gone up, and they're like, what? Like, when was this happening? So yeah, thank you for that. Oh, we have lots of questions now rolling in, so I'm going to move on. Rob says, if we were trying to prove more community value tomorrow, what would be the first thing that you do?
I definitely would look at things like retention, spend, so all of the normal key metrics kind of thing, you know, churn, all of the things that members versus, you know, non-members do. And then look at, you know, what are the key metrics for that business, of course, right? So for each business that will be different. But yeah, you can put in place programs where you're tracking members of community versus non-members and then see the differences.
Okay, perfect. Ollie says, what's our favorite definition of a community owner versus a community builder versus a community manager? Do you have your own definition, Vincent?
No, not really. Like, to be honest, I'm not that bothered about all of the different titles. They're very misused anyway. And you know, I use community ownership more as a concept than that I expect anyone to have the job title community owner. So no, I think, you know, we're all working in this field and it's still evolving. And so where we eventually end up with job titles, who knows? There's endless discussion about that.
Yeah, right. Now, Isaac says, is your beard fueled by engaged community members? And that's the reason it's so majestic.
Yes, correct. Yes. Years and years of community members involved, growing into a long beard.
Great. Well, we don't have any more questions right now. So if you do have any questions in the next 10 seconds, drop them into the Q&A tab in the chat. Thank you so much, Vincent. So many great things that you shared and so many great tips and tricks for people to take away straight after this and implement them into their communities. Thank you so much for joining us today at CMX Spark, and yeah, hope to see you very soon.